It's now 9 days since the alleged poison attack on the Syrian town of Douma. Chemical weapons inspectors still haven't been able to visit the site, although Russian officials say they will be given access on Wednesday. At the weekend, Syrian government sites near Damascus and Homs were bombed by the US, France and the UK in response to the alleged attack. Today, Theresa May came to the Commons to explain why the strikes took place and why Parliament wasn't allowed a say beforehand. The Prime Minister said the UK had explored every diplomatic channel, but had decided there was no alternative to limited, carefully targeted action. She said it was legally and morally right for the UK to join airstrikes against the Syrian regime, and she criticised Jeremy Corbyn's stance.
The Leader of the Opposition has said that he can only countenance involvement in Syria if there is UN authority behind it. The House should be clear. That would mean a Russian veto on our foreign policy. When the Cabinet met on Thursday, we considered the advice of the Attorney-General. Based on this advice, we agreed that it was not just morally right, but also legally right to take military action, together with our closest allies, to alleviate further humanitarian suffering.
But Jeremy Corbyn stood firm in his opposition to the airstrikes and reiterated his view that Parliament should always be given a say before the government takes military action.
The attack in Douma was an horrific attack on civilians using chemical weapons, part of a civil war that has killed hundreds of thousands of people. Mr. Speaker, this statement serves as a reminder that the Prime Minister is accountable to this Parliament, not to the whims of the US President. We clearly need a War Powers Act in this country to transform a now broken convention into a legal obligation.
The government's legal justification for military action rested on averting a humanitarian catastrophe caused by the Syrian regime's use of chemical weapons. But opponents, like the Labour leader, have argued that bombs don't save lives. Well, efforts to build a wider strategy are underway. France has tabled a resolution at the UN Security Council that deals with the use of chemical weapons, the protection of civilians and a political settlement to end the 7-year-long conflict. But Russia's used its veto a dozen times to block UN Security Council resolutions on Syria on issues including condemnation of the bombing of Aleppo and ceasefires. So can this attempt to bring an end to the war succeed where previous efforts have failed? Well, possibly not if it depends on trust and diplomacy between all the parties. The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, speaking to the BBC's Hard Talk, said the state of relations with the West was the worst for decades.
Well, I think it's worse, because during the Cold War there were channels of communication, and there was no obsession with Russophobia, which looks like, genocide by sanctions.
Well, the BBC's chief international correspondent Lyse Doucet is in Syria. I asked her to describe the humanitarian situation there.
There is a humanitarian catastrophe in Syria, but it is not caused solely by the use of chemical weapons. The suffering caused by chemical weapons, as profound as it is but a fraction of the suffering that has gone on in Syria day in, day out, sometimes minute in and minute out for most of the last more than 7 years. Syria has been in urgent need of a ceasefire, a humanitarian pause, a negotiated solution for years. But year after year, there have been endless efforts and endless failures. When you talk to a Syrian official now, they will say something along the lines of, look at where we are in control now. All of the major cities are under the Syrian government's control again, and President Assad is still vowing to take back every inch of Syrian territory. These are not the words of a leader who's interested in political negotiations.
Lyse Doucet in Syria.